I'm Hannah Mercer, 33 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to earn a kind of approval that never came. The night it finally broke, we were all seated around my parents' long oak dining table, candles flickering against the silverware. My mother lifted her glass smile wide and steady and said, "Your sister has always been the provider." The words floated up like a blessing, drawing polite applause from everyone except me. My phone, tucked beneath the napkin in my lap, vibrated with another overdue payment notice, one I had quietly paid on Emily's behalf. I didn't raise my voice or slam my fork down. I just smiled, faintly, leaned back and said, "Perfect. Then she can handle the $9,200 I've been covering for her." The silence that followed didn't sound shocked. It sounded like truth finally making itself heard. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to sit through a family dinner that left you swallowing your pride instead of dessert. I grew up believing family dinners were performances, and my mother was the director. Every seat had its place, every compliment was scripted. My father always began with a toast about gratitude, as if those words could patch over everything we didn't talk about. My mother handled the appearances, perfect napkins, perfect smiles, perfect stories about her daughters. And Emily, she was the star of every act. She had a light around her that people wanted to believe in. When I was 10, I overheard my mom tell a neighbor, "Emily's our achiever and Hannah's our helper." I remember laughing along, pretending it didn't sting, but inside it settled deep like a quiet bruise I carried into adulthood. In photos, Emily always stood front and center, shoulders back, her confidence effortless. I was the one making sure everyone looked their best, fixing hair, holding coats, keeping track of the details no one else noticed. Mom's world revolved around perception, who got invited where, which church families admired us, whose daughter made the Christmas card look perfect. Love in her eyes was something that came with applause. And Dad, well, he believed peace meant pretending. He never raised his voice, never questioned the stories my mother told. When tension rose, he'd clear his throat and murmur, "Let's not ruin the evening." For years, I took that as wisdom. Now I understand it was just another way to stay comfortable. Emily thrived in that comfort. She was the kind of person who could charm a stranger in seconds. In high school, she was the cheer captain. In college, she floated from one internship to another on charm alone. I worked summers, saved what I could, paid for my own car, my own rent. Emily networked and smiled her way through. Even when she barely scraped by, she never looked like she was struggling. People wanted to believe she was the success story, and Mom fed that narrative like it was gospel. When I started my job in marketing, I thought I was finally earning some ground. I had my own apartment, my own rhythm, and a steady paycheck. But it didn't take long before Emily's late-night calls began. "Hey, Han, can I borrow just until Friday? My account's frozen. You're the only one I trust with this." Her tone always soft, always urgent. And I'd say yes every time. That's what helpers do. I told myself she'd make it right, that she just needed time. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years of quiet transfers and mounting interest fees. I watched her online life sparkle: new dresses, rooftop dinners, trips she couldn't afford. Meanwhile, I was cutting corners at the grocery store and pretending it didn't matter. When Mom sent out an invitation for a special dinner one Thursday night, I almost didn't go. The subject line said, "Formal attire family announcement." That should have been my warning. But habit is hard to unlearn, especially when it's been dressed up as love. I showed up on time, the table glowing under chandelier light. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the air, and I told myself I could make it through one more night. Dad gave his usual toast. Mom smiled like she'd just won something, and Emily basked in it all like a star under a spotlight. Then Mom said it, "Your sister has always been the provider." Forks paused, mid-air faces turned toward her like it was scripture. And that was when something inside me, something tired and quiet, finally stopped playing along. I looked around that polished table and realized every story they'd ever told had been rehearsed. Every compliment, every toast, every laugh, all built to protect an illusion that no one but me seemed to see cracking. I wasn't angry. I was done. As Dad lifted his glass again, repeating, "To Emily," I felt a calm settle over me, the kind that comes not from rage, but from release. When I finally spoke, it wasn't planned. It was the truth rising after years of being buried. The silence that followed my words felt endless. No one moved. The candles flickered. Mom blinked first, her smile faltering just slightly, and I knew then that something had shifted for good. That night wasn't about money anymore. It was about what I'd been paying for all along, their version of peace. And as I stood up from that table, I could feel the weight of every "it's fine" I'd ever said fall away. What came next would test every boundary I'd ever drawn, but in that moment, for the first time in my life, I wasn't their helper. I was something else entirely. The night after that dinner, I couldn't sleep. The sound of my own voice replayed in my head, calm, clear, final. For years I had imagined standing up to my family, but I never thought it would come out that quietly. No shouting, no tears, just truth, steady and bare. When I finally did drift off, I dreamed of candles burning down to stubs and an empty table still glowing under the chandelier. By morning, the calm had vanished, replaced with the weight of what I'd said. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages, just silence, the kind that carries both peace and warning. 2 days passed before my mother called. Her voice was sweet, deliberate, every syllable polished. "Hannah, we'd like you to come by for dinner again, Thursday night, same time." The tone wasn't a request. It was an order dressed as an invitation. I asked if Emily would be there. "Of course," she said, "and your father too. We all just need to clear the air." I almost declined, but something in me wanted to see how far they would go to protect their story. I said yes. Thursday arrived, colder than it should have been for early spring. The Mercer house looked the same, manicured hedges, porch light glowing even before dusk, but the air felt heavier. My father opened the door, his tie already loosened, a half smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Glad you came," he said. Inside, the dining room was already set. Same table, same candles, same scent of rosemary. My mother moved about briskly, arranging napkins that didn't need arranging. Emily leaned against the far wall, scrolling through her phone like none of this mattered. Her boyfriend Mark sat beside her, hands folded, silent. We didn't start with a toast this time. My father sat at the head of the table, a manila folder in front of him like a court file. "Let's handle this like adults," he said evenly. "We're all family here." He slid the folder toward me. Inside was a single check. $9,200, he said. "We can settle this." The number was exact down to the last cent. My mother's voice softened. "We don't need to drag this through the mud, sweetheart. You embarrassed your sister enough already." Emily's eyes never left her phone. "You could have just called," she murmured. "You didn't have to make a scene." I took a slow breath. "I did call," I said, "twice." She looked up for the first time, brow furrowed as if she didn't understand. "You're being dramatic," she said. "I'm being honest," I replied. My father sighed, folding his hands. "We've resolved the financial part," he said. "What's left is your attitude." That was when I reached into my bag and laid a thin stack of papers on the table. "What's left," I said, "is the truth." The room went still. My mother froze mid-motion, one hand clutching a linen napkin. Emily's phone dimmed screen going black. The papers on the table weren't just receipts. They were every transaction, every date, every message confirming what she owed. "You saved those," Emily whispered, her voice thin. "I learned from you," I said. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a quiet voice broke through. "Is it true?" Mark's question hung in the air. He was still sitting, but his posture had changed, no longer relaxed, no longer sure of her. Emily swallowed hard. "It's complicated," she said quickly. He nodded once. "Okay." Then he stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. The sound of the door closing was sharper than any shout could have been. My father exhaled through his nose, long and heavy. "You didn't need to involve him," he said. "This could have stayed in the family." I looked at him and said softly, "That's been the problem all along." My mother's face crumpled just slightly before she forced it back into composure. "We're trying to help you," she said. "You've been under stress, that's all. Let's just put this behind us." I pushed the check back toward my father. "That's not forgiveness," I said. "That's hush money." His expression didn't change, but his shoulders lowered, like a man who'd been holding up a wall for too long. The silence that followed was worse than anger. It was the sound of people realizing they couldn't spin the story anymore. I gathered my papers, slid them back into my bag, and stood. "You wanted a provider," I said, "and you had one. You just didn't like who it was." I turned toward the door. No one called my name this time either. The days that followed felt hollow. No calls, no messages, no explanations. It was as if I'd been erased from the family script altogether. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner in my quiet apartment, and tried not to replay every word. But silence has a way of echoing louder than shouting. One evening, after a long day, I opened my email and saw a message I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Hi, I think your sister scammed me." Her name was Tara Jennings. She said she'd worked for Emily's Women in Tech startup, a company I'd only ever seen mentioned in passing on social media. Tara explained that she'd designed branding materials, handled digital campaigns, and had never been paid. Attached were screenshots, invoices, messages, all signed by Emily. The more I read, the tighter my chest felt. By midnight, I'd gone through every attachment. By dawn, I was still sitting at my kitchen table, coffee gone cold, staring at the screen. Tara wasn't the only one. She'd mentioned others, designers, interns, vendors. All promised equity, none paid a dime. 2 days later, a knock came at my door. It was Mark. He looked older than I remembered, like the last week had aged him. "She left this," he said, handing me a small flash drive. "I don't want any part of it, but you'll want to see." Inside the drive was a single file, bridgeloans.xlsx. Rows and rows of names, dollar amounts, and notes. Friends, colleagues, relatives. Beside my name, Hannah, $9, $200 cleared. Next to it, one word, backstop. My stomach turned. She'd used me as collateral, the person she could always fall back on. That night, I opened a fresh folder on my laptop and began organizing everything: receipts, emails, messages, the spreadsheet. Not for revenge, just to have it all in one place, to see the full picture for once. As I scrolled through each name, I realized how wide her web had grown and how long my parents must have looked the other way. The evidence told a story much bigger than family money. It was about manipulation disguised as charm, and a family too afraid of embarrassment to stop it. The next morning, I printed a single copy of that spreadsheet and stared at it under the kitchen light. Every line, every figure, every name she'd used. For years, I'd been the helper who fixed the messes no one wanted to admit existed. But now those messes had faces and names beyond mine. I didn't know what to do yet, but I knew one thing: silence had protected the wrong person for far too long. Outside my window, the city was waking up: car engines, distant horns, the usual rhythm of life. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. Whatever came next wouldn't be quiet. And for once, I wasn't afraid of that. The flash drive Mark had given me sat on my kitchen counter for days before I could bring myself to open it again. Each time I passed it, I felt the same chill run through me. I already knew what was inside, but knowing wasn't the same as seeing. When I finally sat down one Saturday morning and opened the file, the names lined up neatly across the screen like a roll call of people my sister had used. Each row had a dollar amount beside it, a small note in the far column, and next to my name the word backstop. The more I read, the heavier it felt. Friends, colleagues, family, acquaintances, each one had a story that looked different on the surface, but ended the same way. They believed in her. She took their trust, their time, and their money, then moved on. I printed every sheet, made copies, and organized them by date. It wasn't about revenge. It was about keeping the truth somewhere it couldn't be rewritten. A few nights later, Tara called. Her voice shook when she spoke. "I didn't know who else to tell," she said. "She promised me stock options, Hannah. Real contracts, even a tax form." Then she disappeared. I listened, taking notes while she explained how Emily had built a fake company profile, hired designers, developers, and consultants, and then vanished when payments were due. Tara mentioned another name, Evan, a web developer who had built their site. I wrote it down. The next day, I found Evan's contact through LinkedIn and sent a short message explaining who I was. His reply came within the hour. "You're her sister. We need to talk. We spoke that evening." His tone was calm but tired, the voice of someone who had been holding anger too long. He'd invested 2 months into Emily's startup, creating a platform that was supposed to launch a mentorship network for women in tech. When pay never came, he confronted her. She told him her investors had pulled out and that family money would cover the delay. I felt the sting of that phrase even through the phone. Over the next week, my inbox filled with stories like theirs. Some short, some long, all threaded with the same pattern of charm and betrayal. I started keeping a spreadsheet of my own tracking, who had reached out, how much they had lost, and what evidence they had. It was methodical work, quiet and slow, but it steadied me. Every time I added a name, the fog around my family's version of reality cleared a little more. One evening, while sorting files, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her tone was clipped businesslike. "We've heard some things," she began. "Someone mentioned that Emily's name is circulating online. Please tell me you're not involved." I said, "If people are finally talking, maybe it's because they deserve to be heard." She paused long enough for me to hear her breath catch. "You don't understand," she said. "This could destroy her." "No, Mom," I said softly. "She destroyed herself." She hung up before I could say another word. For days, I avoided checking social media, but eventually I saw it. A post on a local startup forum titled, "The Founder Who Faked Empowerment." No names, but every detail was there: her business model, her promises, the timeline. The comments section filled quickly. At first, people were cautious, asking if it was true. Then came screenshots, email chains, contracts. Each one confirmed what I already knew. The thread spread fast, and by the next morning, Emily's name was trending alongside words like fraud and scam. By noon, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. His voice sounded older, thinner. "Your mother's beside herself," he said. "She says you're behind this article." I told him I wasn't. "But it's true," I said. "You can't ask people to stay quiet anymore." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, the calm cracked. "You're hurting this family, Hannah. Whatever your sister did, we handle it privately." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad," I said, "keeping it private is what let it grow." He didn't argue, he just sighed, said my name once and hung up. That evening I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. My father's handwriting covered the front. Inside was a check for $15,000 and a short note for closure. "Let's move on." I folded it once and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't cash it. I didn't tear it up either. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about who they wanted me to be. Quiet, compliant, loyal to the story instead of the truth. A few days later, Evan emailed again. "You should know," he wrote, "people are gathering evidence. Some of us want to take legal action. You've done more than you realize." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I didn't do anything, I wrote back. I just stopped hiding what she did. He responded almost immediately. "That's exactly what we needed." The following week, I sat in my office watching the news scroll across the bottom of my computer screen. A major publication had picked up the story. They used Emily's name this time. Words like investigation and civil suits pending followed. My phone buzzed again, message after message from unknown numbers. Most were victims thanking me for speaking up. Others were strangers saying, "We've been there." I didn't reply to all of them, but I read every one. That night, as rain tapped against my window, I opened my laptop and began to write. I didn't know if anyone would read it. I titled the document, "The Golden Daughter," "A Family's Silence," "A Sister's Lies," and "The Cost We Paid." The words came slowly at first, then faster. I wrote about the dinner table, the unpaid debts, the fake company, the people she hurt. I wrote about my parents' silence, the illusion they protected, and what it cost to finally speak. When I finished, I sat back and read it all from the beginning. It wasn't vengeful. It was factual, clean, honest. The next morning I pressed publish. The article went live at 9 o'clock sharp. I closed my laptop and went for a walk, unsure what would come of it. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Shares, messages, calls from reporters. Some praised me, others accused me of betrayal. I didn't read most of it. I just let the truth stand on its own. That evening, another email arrived, this one from my parents. The subject line read, "We're deeply disappointed." The message was short. "For now, it's best we end contact. We wish you well, but this has gone too far." I stared at it for a long time. Not angry, not sad, just still. Outside, the rain had stopped. The The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement below my window. For the first time in years, the air in my apartment felt wide and open, like it finally belonged to me. The story was out there now beyond anyone's control, and the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. Somewhere out there, my family was rewriting their version of what happened. They always did. But this time, I didn't need to correct it. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed to breathe. And as I sat in that quiet, I knew what came next wouldn't be about noise or exposure. It would be about peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop performing for people who never listened. The morning after I published my story, everything felt deceptively normal. My coffee tasted the same, the city outside my window hummed the way it always did, and the light fell across the floor like nothing had changed. But under that calm, something had shifted. The silence from my family was complete now. No calls, no texts, no messages, pretending to smooth things over. It was as if I had stepped out of their frame and they'd already cropped the picture. For once, I didn't mind. The truth had a way of filling the empty spaces they left behind. By late morning, the first signs of fallout appeared online. Emily's name trended again this time, tied to words like fraud investigation and employee complaints. Posts from former interns and freelancers began surfacing with screenshots that mirrored the evidence I'd gathered. They shared their stories, small, painful pieces of the same puzzle. It spread faster than I expected, and by afternoon, news outlets had picked it up. One headline read, "Local startup founder accused of defrauding employees and investors." The article was factual, restrained, even sympathetic in tone. Still, it was enough to push the story into daylight. That evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The woman on the line introduced herself as Rachel Klein, a journalist from the Seattle Ledger. She spoke with a calm, steady tone that didn't carry judgment or pity. "Your piece was powerful," she said. "We'd like to verify some of the records you referenced. I want to make sure the victims' voices are handled correctly." Her words were careful, respectful. I agreed to meet her the next day at a small cafe near downtown. When I arrived, Rachel was already seated by the window with a notepad and a cup of tea. She greeted me with a small nod and a gentle smile. "I know this must be difficult," she said, "but what you did putting your name on that story that takes courage." I told her I wasn't looking for credit, just truth. She nodded, flipping open her notebook. "That's often how real change starts," she said. "We spent nearly 2 hours going over documents, cross-checking names, and confirming timelines." She asked thoughtful questions, never pushing too far. Before I left, she said softly, "I'll make sure your sister's victims are the focus, not the scandal." I believed her. When the Ledger story came out 2 days later, it spread wider than mine ever could. It named sources, provided verified statements, and confirmed that authorities were reviewing Emily's activities. My inbox filled again, not with anger this time, but with gratitude. Dozens of people wrote to say thank you for giving their pain a voice. Some shared how they'd been too afraid to come forward until they saw my name attached to the story. Reading their messages felt heavy but honest. For once, silence wasn't protecting anyone. That night, my phone lit up with my mother's name. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Her voice was brittle, almost unrecognizable. "She's broken, Hannah," she whispered. "She can't leave the house. People are calling her names online. She's your sister." I closed my eyes. "She's facing consequences," I said quietly. "That's not the same as being broken." My mother's voice wavered. "You've always been so harsh." "No," I said, "I've just stopped lying for her." The line went silent except for the sound of her soft, uneven breathing. For once, neither of us hung up in anger. We just let the quiet settle between us, heavy but real. Days passed and the world kept moving. I went to work, sat through meetings, answered emails. Yet there was a strange calm to it all. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. My apartment felt different, lighter somehow. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. Each night I would glance at the folder on my desktop labeled "Closure," once called "Evidence," and feel a small sense of peace, knowing it was there, safe, complete. It wasn't a weapon. It was a record. Proof that I hadn't imagined years of imbalance. One evening as I was cleaning up after dinner, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, my father stood in the hallway, coat still buttoned, eyes tired. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of everything had settled into his frame. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded and stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table folding his hands the way he always did when searching for words. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he said. "She wouldn't approve." I sat across from him waiting. After a long pause, he said, "I thought I was keeping the peace all those years. I see now it was just keeping the performance." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I didn't interrupt. He reached into his coat pocket and set a small envelope on the table. 15,000, he said quietly, "to cover everything else. You deserve that much." I looked at it but didn't touch it. "Money isn't what I need," I said. He nodded slowly. "Accountability," he murmured. "Yes," I said. "That." For a long time we just sat there, the sound of the refrigerator humming softly in the background. When he finally stood, he hesitated by the door. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it." I didn't have words, so I just nodded. He left without another sound. The next morning the story appeared on national outlets. Larger networks picked it up. They didn't use my name this time, but the details were unmistakable. Emily's company was being investigated for fraud and tax evasion. I watched the coverage from my desk at work, the anchor's voice, smooth and practiced. My co-workers whispered in the hallway, not realizing they were talking about me. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. That weekend I drove past my parents' house. The porch light, always glowing for as long as I could remember, was dark. The curtains were drawn. I slowed down, but didn't stop. The house that once felt like the center of every decision in my life now looked like a set after the actors had left. Empty, staged quiet. When I got home, I stood by the window looking out at the city lights. I opened my laptop and backed up my folder again, the last time I'd ever need to. I renamed it One Final Time Peace. I didn't save it to punish anyone. I saved it to remember how far I'd come. The noise around the story started to fade after that. The internet moved on to new scandals, new headlines. But in my small apartment, the quiet stayed. It wasn't lonely or cold. It was steady, like breathing after holding it too long. I still didn't know if my parents would ever call again, or if Emily would ever reach out. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe that was part of the cost. But as I turned off the lights and felt the soft hum of the city outside my window, I knew one thing for certain. Peace doesn't always come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes it comes from walking away. And somewhere deep down, I sensed that the story wasn't done yet. Something was still waiting to be said, not for them, but for me. The weeks after my father's visit felt strangely still. The noise that once filled my life, the calls, the arguments, the endless need to fix things, had fallen silent. Even the city outside seemed to hum at a softer pitch, as if life itself was taking a breath. My parents hadn't called again, and Emily had vanished from every public platform. At work, people treated me gently, careful with their questions. I didn't correct them or explain more than I had to. I just went through each day steady and quiet, like walking through fog after a storm. It was around that time I realized how much of myself had been tied to fixing someone else's mess. Without that constant pull, I didn't know what to do with the empty hours that followed. One evening, I searched online for local counseling centers. I wasn't looking for advice or answers, just somewhere to talk. That's how I found Dr. Lisa Grant, a therapist who specialized in family systems. Her office was in an old brick building downtown, small but warm, with soft light and a faint scent of cedar. On our first session, she asked, "What brings you here?" I didn't know how to answer at first. I said I told the truth, and it broke everything. She nodded gently, as if she'd heard that before. Over the next hour, I talked about the dinner, the debts, the article, all the pieces that led to this new quiet I couldn't yet name. Dr. Grant listened without interrupting, occasionally asking questions that landed in places I didn't expect. When I left her office that day, I didn't feel lighter. I felt honest, and maybe that was a start. The following weekend, I drove out of the city for the first time in months. The sky stretched wide and gray above the highway, the air cool enough to roll the window down. I didn't have a destination. I just drove until the noise in my head softened. Somewhere outside Tacoma, I stopped at a roadside diner and sat by the window with a slice of pie and a cup of coffee. For the first time in a long while, I ate slowly without checking my phone, without waiting for it to buzz. It stayed still on the table beside me, screen dark. A few days later, Dr. Grant asked me what forgiveness looked like in my family. I laughed quietly. "It means pretending it never happened," I said. She tilted her head. "And what does accountability look like?" I thought for a long time before answering. "It looks like silence that isn't forced," I said. "The kind that belongs to you." She smiled slightly. "Then maybe that's where you start." In early May, an email arrived from a name I didn't recognize, Megan Daniels. She worked for a nonprofit that supported small business victims of fraud. She'd read my article and asked if I'd consider speaking at one of their events. My first instinct was to decline. I didn't want to be on a stage or rehash the details. But something about her message stayed with me. I remembered all the people who had written to thank me, people who had been manipulated and silenced in their own ways. Maybe sharing my story wasn't about reopening wounds. Maybe it was about showing what it looked like to heal. The event was held in a small auditorium filled with about 100 people. When I stepped on stage, the lights were bright enough that I couldn't see the faces clearly. I spoke slowly, not about Emily's lies or the investigation, but about what it costs to carry silence for too long. I told them that I used to believe loyalty meant keeping secrets, that peace came from staying quiet, and how one night at a dinner table I realized silence was just another way of disappearing. When I finished, the audience was quiet for a moment before they began to clap. Not loud or dramatic, just steady human applause. Afterward, several people came up to thank me. One woman, probably in her 60s, touched my arm and said, "You said what I couldn't say 30 years ago." That night driving home, I didn't feel powerful or brave. I just felt free. By June, the official reports had started appearing online. Emily's investigation was still ongoing, but multiple victims had filed claims. My parents didn't speak publicly, but a few family friends reached out quietly, offering their sympathy in coded language. "It's such a shame," they'd say, or "families go through hard things." I thanked them politely and let the calls end where they began. One Sunday afternoon, as I was watering the small row of plants on my balcony, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. It was my mother's. She sat behind the wheel for a long time before finally stepping out. I opened the door before she could knock. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pulled back, eyes tired. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded and led her inside. We sat in the living room, the air between us thick but still. "I didn't come to argue," she said quietly. "I just wanted to see you." I poured her a glass of water and waited. After a moment she whispered, "I don't know how to fix this, Hannah." Her hands trembled slightly. "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to stop pretending it didn't happen." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Your father says you've changed." I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally started becoming myself. She stayed for about an hour. We didn't talk about Emily or the press or what came next. We just talked about small things, a new neighbor she didn't like, a recipe she'd tried the weather. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "She's not well," she said. "Emily, she's lost." I nodded, not with anger, but with the understanding that came after too much time spent trying to save someone who didn't want saving. "I hope she finds her way," I said. My mother nodded once, then stepped into the hall and was gone. After she left, I sat on the couch for a long time, listening to the hum of traffic outside. The air smelled faintly of rain. I thought of all the years spent keeping peace that never included me, of every apology I'd made just to hold a fragile family together. Now there was nothing left to fix, and somehow that felt like grace. In my next session, Dr. Grant asked how it felt to see my mother again. I said it felt like standing in the same room but breathing different air. "Then keep breathing," she said softly. "You're learning what peace costs and what it's worth." That night I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere my sister was living with the weight of her choices. My parents were rewriting the story of what happened, and the world kept moving. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to let it move without me. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle again, not heavy this time, but steady like a heartbeat. Somewhere inside that silence, something small and certain began to grow. Not anger, not sorrow. Something else. Something like renewal. The first real sign that life was shifting again came one morning in late summer. The air had turned crisp, and sunlight spilled across my kitchen table through half-open blinds. I was sorting through bills when an unfamiliar number flashed across my phone. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in me hesitated. I answered. A soft voice came through the line. "Hi, this is Laura Simmons. You don't know me, but I think we share a connection to your sister." Her tone was careful, gentle. I felt the air tighten in my chest. Laura explained that she'd worked with Emily for nearly a year on what she thought was a women's business mentorship network. "I found your story online," she said quietly, "and I just wanted to say thank you." We met a week later at a small cafe downtown. She arrived wearing a light blue scarf and carried a folder under her arm. When she spoke, there was no anger in her voice, just exhaustion. "I lost a lot because of her," she said. "Money, time, people I trusted. But hearing you speak, it helped me let go of the shame." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were letters, statements, and proof of payments she'd made to Emily's company. "For the authorities," she said, "if they still need it." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I took it. We talked for almost 2 hours. Laura had a calm steadiness that made it easy to breathe around her. Before she left, she said something that stayed with me. "The hardest part isn't losing the money," she said. "It's realizing how long you kept believing someone who never planned to tell the truth." After she left, I walked home through the quiet streets, the late afternoon sun painting the windows gold. I thought about what she said and how it mirrored my own years of pretending things were fine. The weight of that realization sat heavy in my chest, not painful, just solid, like something finally taking its real shape. The next week, I brought the documents to the investigator handling Emily's case. He thanked me for coming in, his tone professional but kind. "This will help," he said. "We're close to wrapping this up." I didn't ask for details. I just nodded, left the office, and stood outside for a moment, feeling the breeze move through my hair. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the story alone. That weekend, I met Dr. Grant for our usual session. She asked how things were settling. "Quieter," I said, "but in a good way." She smiled, scribbling something on her notepad. "Quieter can be powerful," she said. "It means there's room for new things to grow." I told her about Laura, about the meeting with the investigator, and how it all felt like pieces closing one by one. She leaned back in her chair. "Sometimes closure isn't a door slamming shut," she said softly. "It's just the sound of someone walking away without looking back." Her words followed me home that evening. I sat on my couch, watching the city lights flicker outside, and realized I hadn't thought about Emily in days. Not with anger, not with longing, just not at all. The thought surprised me. It felt like healing wasn't something that arrived all at once. It crept in quietly, reshaping the space where pain used to live. One morning in early September, I received a short email from my father. The subject line read simply, "Update." The message was brief. Emily had agreed to a settlement with several of her victims. "It's nearly over," he wrote. "She'll have to repay what she can and accept the rest as consequence." He didn't defend her this time. He didn't ask for silence or forgiveness, just facts, plain and unpolished. I replied with 2 words, "Thank you." A week later, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since winter. The drive felt strange, like revisiting a place you used to dream about but no longer needed. When I pulled into the driveway, my father was waiting outside, hands tucked in his pockets. The porch light was on again. Inside the house smelled the same rosemary lemon polish and something faintly floral. My mother came from the kitchen, her eyes red but dry. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, my father said, "She's going away for a while, somewhere quiet." My mother nodded, looking down. "It's better this way," she whispered. I could see she'd been crying, but the tears had run out. "Are you angry?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Not anymore." We sat together at the same dining table where it all began. The candles were gone now, the silverware plain. My father poured 3 cups of coffee, and for the first time in my life, the silence around us didn't feel staged. It felt real, honest. When I stood to leave, my mother hugged me, a brief, uncertain gesture, but it was the first she'd given in years. "Take care of yourself, Hannah," she said. Her voice trembled, but it was sincere. Driving home, the sky had turned deep orange over the horizon. The air carried the faint chill of approaching autumn. I rolled down the window, feeling the wind against my face, the quiet hum of the road beneath me. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about releasing what couldn't be repaired. Later that night, I found a message from Laura waiting in my inbox. "I thought you'd want to know," she wrote. "The others got their settlements too. It's over." I stared at the words for a long moment, then closed my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat still, letting the calm settle around me. A few days after that, I walked along the waterfront, the cool air brushing against my skin. The city felt softer somehow, as if it had exhaled with me. I stopped to watch the water shift under the sunlight. My reflection looked steady, unfamiliar in a good way. For the first time, I saw a woman who wasn't defined by someone else's chaos. When I got home, I took the old envelope my father had once given me, the one with the check I never cashed, and tucked it inside a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Some debts can't be repaid in money, and some truths don't need to be rewritten. That evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was short, only 3 words. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I didn't need to ask who it was from." I stared at it for a while, the letters glowing softly in the dark. Then I set the phone face down and turned off the light. The apology didn't erase anything, but it settled something deeper, something wordless. The story that had started at that dinner table, the one built on silence and pretense, was finally ending, not with noise or applause, but with quiet truth. And in that quiet, I felt ready for whatever came next. The text from Emily sat on my phone like a stone. "I'm sorry, Hannah." 3 words, soft and simple, yet heavy in a way that took the air out of the room. I didn't respond that night. I just set the phone down on the nightstand and watched the dark ceiling until morning. By the time the first light filtered through the curtains, I knew that message wasn't about forgiveness. It was about surrender. The following day passed quietly. At work, the rhythm of everyday life moved on unchanged by the storm that had consumed my family. Deadlines, meetings, coffee breaks, life in its ordinary way refused to stop. Yet somewhere deep inside, a part of me knew that something final had shifted. When I returned home that evening, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and found the folder I'd once labeled Peace. The files were all still there: receipts, statements, messages. Proof of everything I had carried and finally released. I didn't delete them. I just closed the folder and backed it up one last time. A few days later, my father called. His voice sounded worn but steady. "She wants to talk," he said. "Your sister. She's asked if you'll see her." The request hung between us. "Why now?" I asked. "She said she needs to face you," he replied. His tone wasn't pleading, just tired. I agreed, not out of obligation, but because part of me wanted to know what apology looks like when the lies have already burned down. We met at a small park near the edge of the city, the kind with old oak trees and benches that creaked when you sat down. It was late afternoon, the light slanting gold through the leaves. Emily was already there, sitting on a bench, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no practiced smile. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked smaller, like the air around her had collapsed. She stood as I approached, but didn't move closer. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain. I nodded and sat, leaving space between us. We sat like that for a while, the sound of children playing in the distance, a dog barking near the path. Finally, she spoke. "I've been in counseling," she said. "They said I need to take responsibility." She paused, twisting a tissue in her hands. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to hear it from me, not through a screen, not from Mom or Dad." I watched her for a moment before speaking. "You hurt a lot of people," I said quietly. "Not just me." She nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. "I know. I thought if I kept moving fast enough, I could stay ahead of it. But the truth always catches up. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air carried the faint scent of rain. Finally, she said, "I didn't know how to stop lying. It became the only way I knew how to survive." There was no self-pity in her voice this time, just exhaustion. I looked at her and saw not the sister I'd grown up resenting, but someone stripped bare of the illusions she once hid behind. "You don't need to convince me," I said. "You just need to start living with what's real." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Can we ever be okay again?" she asked. I shook my head. "Maybe not the way it was, but maybe something new can grow if we let it." She exhaled the sound, almost a sob. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I really am." I nodded once. "I believe you," I said, not as a promise, but as truth in that moment. Then I stood. She stayed sitting, watching the ground, shoulders hunched, like someone learning to carry her own weight. That night I walked home through the soft drizzle, the streets reflecting the city lights like glass. I didn't feel relief exactly, just quiet acceptance, the kind that comes when you finally stop fighting what can't be undone. A few weeks later, I heard from Rachel Klein, the journalist who had covered the story months before. "I wanted to let you know," she said over the phone, "the investigation's been officially closed. Your sister took the plea deal. No jail time, but full restitution." I thanked her, unsure what else to say. She paused before hanging up. "I hope you're finding peace, Hannah," she said. "You deserve it." The news spread quickly among those who had followed the case. For some, it was closure. For others, not enough. But I'd learned by then that justice doesn't always look like balance. It just looks like truth standing where lies used to live. One evening, I met Laura for dinner. We hadn't seen each other since the settlements went through. She looked brighter, freer somehow. Over plates of pasta and soft conversation, she said, "It's strange, isn't it? Getting justice and realizing it doesn't fix everything." I smiled faintly. "It's not supposed to," I said. "It just clears the ground so you can start over." She nodded, understanding. After dinner, we stood outside under the streetlights. The air smelled faintly of rain again, the same way it had that day in the park. "You know, Laura said I think you saved more people than you'll ever realize." I shook my head gently. "I didn't save anyone I said. I just stopped pretending." She smiled. "Sometimes that's the same thing." When I got home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city hum quietly below. My phone buzzed once more. This time it was a photo from my father. It showed my parents' dining table bare, except for a single candle in the center. The caption read, "We're trying again." I stared at it for a long moment. The same table that had once been a stage for performance was now stripped down to something simple and real. Maybe that was its own kind of justice. As the night settled around me, I realized I didn't need more apologies, more explanations, or more noise. The truth had already done its work. My family would never be what it once was, but maybe that was the point. What survived wasn't perfection. It was honesty. Outside, the rain started again, gentle and rhythmic against the glass. I closed my eyes, listening to it fall. For the first time, the sound didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace returning home. The rain kept falling through the night, a soft rhythm against the windows that carried me into morning. When I woke, the city was washed clean, the streets glistening under a pale stretch of sun. I brewed coffee and stood by the window watching the steam rise. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of waiting for someone else's apology or approval. The story that had lived in my family for so long, the one written in secret, silence, and roles we never chose, was finally finished. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into something quieter, something I hadn't known how to name before. My parents and I started speaking again in small, careful ways. Nothing grand, no sweeping reconciliations, just simple, honest words exchanged over short phone calls. My father would ask about work. My mother would tell me about the garden. There were pauses, hesitations, but also small moments of truth tucked between them. Each call ended the same way, with a soft "take care" said, like a promise instead of a farewell. Emily didn't return to the city. She wrote a letter instead, handwritten, a little uneven. She thanked me for exposing what she couldn't admit to herself. She said she was rebuilding her life far away, volunteering somewhere that let her start from zero. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw the letter away either. I folded it and placed it inside a drawer with the rest of the old papers, a quiet reminder that some stories don't need a sequel to have meaning. By late autumn, the air had cooled, and the trees along my street began to turn amber and gold. One evening I met Laura for coffee near the waterfront. We sat outside, bundled in coats, watching the water catch the last light of the day. She told me she was starting her own consulting group built on transparency and fairness, the very thing she'd once lost faith in. "You know," she said, smiling faintly, "none of us would have found our footing again if you hadn't spoken up." I shook my head. "I just stopped covering the cracks," I said. "The truth did the rest." After she left, I walked along the pier, the boards creaking softly beneath my steps. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the world felt balanced in a way it hadn't before. I thought of my younger self, the girl who once sat through family dinners rehearsing her smiles, who believed peace meant silence. I wished I could tell her that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the choice to stop shrinking so others can stay comfortable. That night, I met with Dr. Grant for one of our final sessions. We talked about closure, about what it really means. "Sometimes closure isn't a door closing," she said. "It's realizing you can walk past it without needing to knock again." I smiled at that. She was right. The Mercer family story hadn't ended with an apology or a reunion. It had ended with truth spoken out loud and left standing on its own. In December, I visited my parents' house for the holidays. The table was smaller this time, fewer settings, fewer performances. My father carved the roast quietly while my mother lit a single candle. No speeches, no toasts, just a meal shared in peace. Near the end, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you're here," she said simply. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. When I left that evening, snow had started to fall light and slow, blanketing the ground in stillness. I drove home with the radio off, the hum of the tires steady on the road. The city lights blurred softly in the distance, and for the first time I realized how far I'd come without even noticing. The life I had now wasn't loud or perfect. It was real. At home, I poured a cup of tea and opened my window. The cold air brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of snow. Somewhere beyond that quiet, the world kept turning, but I didn't need to chase it anymore. I had learned what it meant to stand still, to breathe without fear, to live without performing. Some stories end with grand gestures, others with quiet truth. Mine ended here in this simple peace I built for myself. Not a victory, not revenge, just release. I had spent years carrying my family's silence, thinking it was love. Now I knew the real kind of love is honest, even when it hurts. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your soul, I hope you choose yourself. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about finally living free of what once kept you small. And if this story stayed with you, take a moment to share where you're listening from, or tell me what truth you've found the courage to speak. Maybe that's how the healing keeps going, one voice at a time.